Today we're talking about three of the most popular investment vehicles that I see a lot of my clients and that I use myself here in Winnipeg. We're going to cover single family homes, duplexes, and properties in the coveted North End that everyone seems to be looking at when they start looking at investment properties in Winnipeg, and which of those three that I think is the best, and which of the other ones you should maybe reconsider. Okay, welcome back to another video. And so if you are new here, my name is Cody. I'm a realtor here in Winnipeg, and I want to help you buy an investment property here. And so if you're interested, or if you're moving to the province, reach out to me. Let's get connected and see if we can find you some passive income here in Winnipeg. So the way we're going to be comparing these three different asset classes or investment vehicles here in Winnipeg is we're going to be looking at the purchasing power, or what sort of capital is required to get into the investments, as well as the appreciation rate, the cash flow, and what I call the headache factor or the stress factor in owning one of these properties. So looking at the three different investment vehicles and in the four different criteria, we kind of get this big grid here. And so what we're going to do is we're going to go through each of the cells to compare, and then that's going to give us sort of an overall grade that I think is better. Now, obviously, it's not an even distribution, and it really depends on your personal risk profile and how much work you're wanting to put into your investment. So if we start with purchasing power for a single family home right now is actually kind of tough because you're competing with home buyers and first-time home buyers specifically in that price range, which is kind of the perfect sweet spot for an investment property. This can really limit your inventory and cause a lot of bidding wars to happen on these properties. As an investor, you want to avoid those types of situations because if you're overpaying, it's not going to work out as an investment. The silver lining here is that I do think that for an average working Manitoban or Winnipegger, I do think that these homes are still affordable, and therefore they're still affordable for using them as rental properties. Okay, and then for duplexes, and keep in mind this is single family homes in a good area and duplexes in a good area. The duplexes are even harder to purchase because they require extra capital because typically they're more expensive. However, the duplexes do give you some added flexibility in creative financing because you could live in one half and get a homeowner loan of 5% if it's less than $500,000 or 10% if it's less than $1 million purchase price. This allows you to use less capital to get into a property if you're willing to live in part of the property while you rent out the other part. Okay. The other thing too is when you're working with resale duplexes, a lot of those investors are simply that, they're investors. So they're usually willing to do some sort of creative financing, potentially seller credits or seller financing a portion of the property so that you can actually buy this property. And because of that, I actually think that buying a duplex is a little bit easier than buying a single family home. Not to mention you stop competing with regular first-time home buyers or home buyers in general because a lot of them aren't really looking at duplexes. And so when you're competing against investors, it becomes more of a numbers game. And for the North End properties, buying a North End property is pretty simple. It's relatively cheap. You can find a duplex for around $150,000 to $200,000, a triplex for a little bit more, and a single family home for $100,000 to $130,000. Now there is some drawbacks to the North End, which we'll get into, but in terms of purchasing power, it's actually a pretty good investment vehicle because you can buy a piece of real estate for $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 down, which in the grand scheme of real estate across the country, for a 20% down payment, that is actually pretty affordable. Okay, so now getting into appreciation. In single family neighborhoods where you're buying these homes in good areas, you actually get a pretty good appreciation rate. In Winnipeg, the average is around 6. That includes Winnipeg in general. When you remove some of the less desirable areas, it's actually a little bit better. And so that is on top of your cash flow and your equity pay down and your tax benefits, you're actually getting a pretty good appreciation rate return. Okay, typically these duplexes aren't getting as good of a return because like I talked about in the purchasing power, when you can buy a duplex, you're only competing against investors. So for you to resell a duplex, it needs to make sense for the next investor to purchase. When you're selling a home or a single family home, you can justify an expensive purchase price if a buyer can make an emotional connection to the property. Okay, and in the North End, your appreciation rate is gonna really be dependent on your timeline of owning. So if you wanna own for a couple of years, it's not gonna be very good. There's properties that have been owned for 5 years that have appreciated maybe $10,000. But part of this is because the purchase price is so low, appreciation generally works as a percentage Not always and not really realistically, but that's sort of the way that we measure it. And so a percentage of a smaller price is a smaller percentage increase, okay? However, the North End still will appreciate over a 10, 15, or 20-year timeline. And so if you're planning to own for that long, it can still work out for you, but don't expect a 6% return. Over 20 years, you might double, which is just above a 3% return. So not fantastic, but that's, a lot of people don't buy these properties for the appreciation. They buy it so they can keep their money somewhere and get the cash flow, which is the next thing we're talking about, cash flow. And so the North End is notorious for having good cash flow because the rents in the city sort of have a minimum that they're at. And the North End has those minimum rents, but still the very cheap purchase price, right? So if you can rent a 1-bedroom at cheapest for $800 in the city, the North End will have that. In the nicer parts, it might be $1,100, $1,200, but the purchase price might be double. So you're not getting twice the rent for double the price, which is why the North End is so attractive to so many people looking to buy properties in Winnipeg. And so your cash flow and your return on your cash will actually be pretty good in the North End. Now, for a single family home, it's actually pretty hard to cash flow positive. It is still possible, but when you consider maintenance, vacancy, capital expenditures, and if you're getting somebody else to manage it, it is very tough to find a cash flowing property without putting a significant amount of money down. This is where I really recommend you managing it yourself so that you can save some of that money after a year or so. Once you've sort of learned how the business is, or if you have other properties, then you could pass it on to a property manager and it's an appreciation game. So duplexes are actually my favorite investment vehicle for cash flow because a duplex might cost a little bit more than a single family home, but with the additional unit, you're actually getting a pretty good return. So let's say you have a duplex that has 5 bedrooms, 3 bathrooms. So you got a 3-2 and a 2-1. If you're renting a 3-2 house in Winnipeg, it might be around $2,000 to $2,500 in a nice area. If you're renting a 3-2 and a duplex, it might be a couple $100 less. However, if it's only $100,000 or $120,000 more to get the additional unit, but you can get an additional $1,400, $1,500 for that 2-bedroom, your cash flow really skyrockets. And so this is where the duplex is the best vehicle for both resale and new construction, which is why we're seeing so many of these infill duplexes show up in Winnipeg. Okay, and the last criteria that we're looking at is the headache factor. And this is why I actually persuade a lot of my clients to avoid the North End, because even though you might get good cash flow and it does appreciate a little bit and you can get into the market, it is such a headache. The tenants there are not high quality tenants. Obviously there is exceptions where you could find high quality tenants, but a majority of them are going to cause you a lot of stress and headaches. And so unless you have really good systems or you're willing to put in the extra effort, I would rather see you save up and buy a single family home or a duplex, which is going to be a little bit less of a headache factor. With that said, the duplex is a little bit more work than a single family home because you have to deal with the neighboring tenants, dealing with each other. So you're going to get noise complaints, you're going to get footsteps complaints if it's a top bottom unit, you're going to get music, whatever, parking, garbage day, they didn't cut the grass, it was their turn. All those nuances that you have to deal between neighboring tenants is gonna land on your shoulders. And so it is a little bit more work. So you get the higher cash flow, but you also get a little bit more work. So that's where how much is the money worth your effort, right? And the beauty in all of this, if you're looking at the North End, I do think that the savings rate that in Winnipeg is achievable in the sense where you can save enough money to be able to afford that single family home down the road. We're not like other cities in Canada where you're trying to save money and homes are getting even more unaffordable. Here, I actually think for a regular working class individual or couple, you can save up enough money to go out and buy a investment property and it could still work out for you financially. Okay, and so that's with all of this said, depending on your personality, if you are just looking for an investment property and you don't know that much, I would keep saving until you can get that single family home. Once you have experience investing, I would start going after duplexes or triplexes in good areas because you have systems or experience in dealing with tenant issues. By then you can incorporate some of the risk mitigation into your lease so that tenants won't actually contact you about every little thing. And so if you're looking for an investment property here in Winnipeg, let's get connected. Let's find you a place, whether it's a single family home, a duplex, or a place in the North End, and you're still convinced that you want to invest there because you want to get into the game, let's find you a place. I do think it is better to buy something than do nothing because everybody wishes they'd bought something before. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll see you in the next one.